My name is Justin Hobson. I'm 36 years old. I'm currently a long-term substitute at Silver Lake Elementary, 4th grade.
My name is Mintam Nguyen, and I currently am not working. I'm just staying at home with Henry, my 14-month-old son. Before that, I was working for a remote startup.
I was born in Fresno, California, 1987. We had about 5 acres of land. It was pretty awesome. We didn't have like helicopter parents, so to speak. So whenever my mom got annoyed with us, it was like, get out of the house, go. So it was a lot of time spent outdoors with my family.
I was born in Vietnam, and I lived there until I was 7, and then I moved to the US. And in Vietnamese, especially in the city, it's a multi-generational house. So it's like 5 stories or whatever, and every family has a little room, or we just live very close to one another. Adjustment wise, I was pretty young, so I don't really remember too much. I remember I had like a translator, or like a friend who was also Vietnamese that was kind of my interpreter. I took it was called ESL back then. Originally, it was my eldest aunt and my youngest uncle. I think it was like mid 80s. They were one of the Vietnamese boat people, so they left Vietnam by boat. And I wish I knew more, and that was something really cool, that when Justin came, he was very interested. Like, I just grew up, I just knew that they left by boat. I didn't know anything else about it. But he was like, hey, can you tell me what you did and like where you went? So I'm like, oh yeah, I never really asked them that before. Like, it's something that I just really took for granted because that was just how I grew up, and that was their story. It wasn't of interest to me, I guess. But yeah, they left by boat and eventually had a host family in Everett that hosted them, and so that was how they were able to immigrate over to the US as refugees. And then they just worked hard and eventually put in the paperwork, sponsorship, to get my other uncles over, my other aunt, and then my grandparents, and then my family and my aunt's family were the last to join them in 1998. So I remember it was November 10th, 1998 that both families came here, and that completed my dad's side of the family. So that Thanksgiving, I remember, was a big thing because that was, the first like reunion of the entire family. So it was pretty cool. And Thanksgiving is like my favorite holiday. Let me see.
Oh, we met on a dating app.
Yeah.
That no
Which
longer.
I don't think it exists anymore.
No longer
so that's
exists.
how obscure it was.
I mean, when we first got together, I remember her mom would just call and be like extremely upset with her being in Los Angeles. She had left her family for this dream of becoming a writer, and that's what she wanted to try to do. She wanted to move there and give it a go. And from her mom's perspective and her parents' perspective, it was, oh, you're abandoning the family. You're more focused on yourself versus the family. And that's a big challenge for Mintam and herself in terms of growing up American, but also having that Vietnamese background, right? So there was definitely that restraint. And then also when we decided to move in together, it's like, you're not going to tell their parents that we're necessarily living together without, being married and all of that. So there was kind of like that hush-hush nature of like, oh, I'm roommating with a friend. So it's like, there was that. I would say that was definitely hard to watch her kind of have those conversations with her mom and feel, I mean, she loves her mother. So she felt she had a strong emotional response to it, and it would, usually subside after a day or two, but it left its impact. But then on my side, I would say the biggest and most challenging part of being with someone like Mintam is a religious. So culturally, her family is Buddhist, and I was raised Christian. I think my mom had messaged my Aunt Sherry on Messenger on Facebook, and she was talking about, it was directed towards Mintam being raised Buddhist, and just her reservations about it. Religion and parents' kind of pressure. Parental pressure in Asian culture is something that is pretty intense. So yeah, and we don't really. I wasn't really raised with that. I mean, they were like, "Oh, you're going to college? Yeah, all right. Whereas it's like Vietnamese culture, it's like, or Asian culture, it's like you're going to college. It's not even like a high five. It's okay, good. You're doing what you should be doing. So Min Tom's family moved here in 1998, and their cultural practices and norms are very, very intact, right? Whereas my family's been here for many generations. And so it's kind of like my family has experienced, I guess, a watering down effect of our heritage. When my ancestors came here, my dad's sides was from Yugoslavia and Hungary, and I'm sure there was a whole bunch of practices that they had that were lost. The language is gone and whatnot. So what has been a special experience from my point of view is being able to see Min Tom's family and how fresh all of those practices are, how intact they are. But it's also interesting to see with her cousins of her generation, even though most of them were born in Vietnam, it's starting to water out a little bit. They don't want to do the tea ceremony. Not all of them. Some of them are very happy to, and they will because the adults still have that persuasion. But it's the wants that has started to change a little bit. And being in my shoes, you can kind of see where this is going to go, because most of them are not in relationships with a Vietnamese person. Now you have two different people of two different ethnic backgrounds and cultural practices coming together, and it's just going to kind of further, I think, take away from that heritage a little bit more in terms of just practicing and whatnot. But from my immediate perspective, it's been kind of awesome because I got to have the experience of my family flying up to Washington from different parts of the United States where they're at, and like the tea ceremony. That was something that's completely different that we hadn't experienced at all. It's just like you get married, there's a reception, and then Bob your uncle, you're gone, you're good to go, right? Whereas here, it's, you know, me talking to my family and be like, yeah, so before the wedding, there's an actual thing called the tea ceremony. And you're going to do that first, or we're going to do that first. And oh, by the way, I want to be very like culturally sensitive. So we're all going to wear ao dais and we're going to like do it up. And people who are Vietnamese don't even really do that anymore. They don't even like, they'll just wear like a suit and tie. Like Min Tom's dad's like, wow, you don't need to wear ao dais. And anyway, so it was my brother wearing an ao dai. The Western diet has taken effect in some of my family. So, you know, his is like ripping over at the side and all this. And it's hilarious, but it's also a lot of fun. I mean, you're coming together with her side of the family and my side of the family, and you're asking their ancestors for permission for our union, which is something that I really appreciate with her culture, is the reverence that they have for their elders. And I think it's something that Western culture has kind of lost. This is her uncle's house. Her grandma used to live here. And part of our bargain is that we keep the altar intact and pay respect. And it's like an education for myself. Got her ancestors that are right here that are her grandparents. And then you've got her immediate grandma, her Banoi, who recently just passed away. And so it's me learning that. I'm like, well, why is her altar lower than the rest of the family altar? Oh, it's because she has to graduate after a year of having her own altar, and then she gets to join the rest of the family. So it's just like little things like that where you're like, okay. And then every time she lights incense, we have this altar, and this altar. I'm like, wow, why so many altars? Where are we paying attention to, you know? And she's like, well, it's basically like who's the eldest, right? And Buddha is the elder. So you go to Buddha and you give him the incense and prayer first. Then it goes to the family that's been passed away for a little bit over a year. And then it goes to Banoi. So it's just cool. I mean, it's just like, from my perspective, it's just it's an education, a constant education. I was like, what? And I come over and the snail's right here, the shell's right here.
I mean, we're pretty good at keeping traditions. I think my favorite and the biggest that we do is Lunar New Year. We were lucky that everyone lived close. The adults made it a goal and a priority and a value to during Lunar New Year to come over here, actually, to my grandparents' house and wish them a Happy New Year. And we would all dress up in our traditional ao dai gowns and go around and wishing the elders. And then we get, you know, the little red envelopes in return. So that was always a big tradition that we made sure to always keep. And it was something of pride, to be able to show your friends that, hey, this is what my family does every year. And same thing with my Vietnamese friends, because they know of the tradition, but they aren't fortunate enough to have their family, and they weren't fortunate to really incorporate that into their life. So seeing that and seeing, the pride that I have for that is really cool for them too. And I'm very also lucky that, Justin really embraces that. Like, I think I told him, like, hey, when we first started dating, I was like, Vietnamese women don't change their last names when we marry. And he's like, oh, that's really cool. And like, totally, yeah, that's not my choice to make. If you want to change it, cool. If you don't, cool. And I don't think like his family still refer to me as Mrs. Hobson, and I don't really mind, but I think it's really cool that he was very receptive to that. And it was just like something that I never even like had to battle with, like, oh, do I change the Hobson? Do I not? But personally, like growing up, I was like, Mom, why can't you just have my same last name? Everyone thinks you're my stepmom because you have this different last name. So back then, I was kind of mad at my mom for having a different last name. But this one, I'm like, I'm, more than ready to tell Henry, like, hey, this is because in my culture, we don't do that. And luckily, it's not too uncommon nowadays, but I want him to understand why that is, and to not see it as a hindrance in his life in any way. And
for us, it's taking Henry and really investing all of that time and him learning both sides, the Buddhist, the maybe a little more puritanical, him learning Vietnamese, but also embracing maybe something other than both our cultural identities. Spanish. I mean, we live in a Spanish speaking, heavily dominated area, being in the western side of the United States.
I want to find more ways to do it as he gets older and can comprehend a bit more. Here, it's just like little things. Like when I say something, I'll try to say it in Vietnamese as well. Like a color, if this is red, this is also màu đỏ, to kind of just expose him to that. And for me as well, to try to expose him to both. So, and then of course, including him in everything that taking him to the temple when my family goes, the stuff like that. And every day when I change out the tea and I light the incense, he sees me doing that. And I think that's very much kind of involving, he'll mimic and he'll kind of do the bowing gesture, and I'll praise him for like, oh, good job. Like, so he kind of gets that positive reinforcement of like, oh, what I'm doing isn't bad. And when he's older, we'll explain why that happens. And then like maybe he'll go to Vietnamese language school when he's a little bit older. I had to do that as well, even though that was my first language. By the time I got to high school, I wasn't as fluent. So it was cool to kind of go to class and learn that. So yeah, just finding opportunities and being open to those opportunities of including him and exposing him. Hopefully we'll be able to take him to Vietnam one day to meet, his other side of the family and stuff like that. To being open, I think, is the best thing you can be in terms of exposing him to his other side. In terms of his identity when he's older, I'm not sure exactly what that looks like or how we can support that. I'm very kind of anxious, and so I'll think about that stuff, but I really don't have an answer to it until we get there. But I just want him to be curious and inquisitive, and I want him to be like proud that he's almost 50% Vietnamese and then a bunch of other percentages of other things. But like, I want him to grow up with the pride that maybe I didn't have. And I think it's a little easier. I felt like I had such a pressure to be like my, Caucasian friends and surround myself with like Caucasian friends and stuff. And I think that obviously has impact on my life decisions and stuff like that, and my life exposure. But I think if we kind of create the opportunities for him and celebrate and not feel like he has to be a certain person or do things a certain way, I think hopefully that kind of freedom and just the inherent fact that he's a little bit of both and he's, is exposed to both. It'll just be like, yeah, that's who I am kind of thing. So I just want him to be open as possible and just to not just accept it, but like celebrate it, because I think it's an advantage for any person to have.
That would be awesome if people saw our relationship and saw that we embraced both sides of our cultural identity. And maybe people, it's something that is amazing. It's awesome. You're celebrating those differences. And all the things that make this country great in terms of accepting differences and whatnot. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, if we were to take our relationship back to 1945, it would be a whole nother story, and that's not very long ago. So we're just benefiting off of the steps that other people have endure a much harder time too. There's just, I guess, if there's a want for anyone who's looking at our relationship, it's just to be able to, you maybe have that observation of like, dang, that's pretty cool. Like their life is so much more colorful because they're accepting and trying to preserve both sides of their identity.
Maybe what I would have wanted to see when I was younger and thinking, like, oh, am I ever going to get married one day? You know, that kind of stuff. It's like, I just want it to be known that it's like possible to be both. Like, I think growing up, there was definitely a pressure to assimilate. And I know I was the kid that was ashamed of their lunch because it was smelled different than everyone else's and looked different than everyone else's, like sandwiches or whatever. And so I wish I would have told myself, like, hey, like, who cares? You know, like when you're older, like that doesn't have any sort of relevance. Like, and I love Vietnamese food. It wasn't like I was, you know, I hated the food and my mom made me eat that, but like I loved it. I was just ashamed to eat it. So I just want people to recognize that like it's beautiful being different, I guess. Like you don't have to be the same, and the pressure to be the same is, I think, less than it was before. So I just hope, I guess, Henry realizes that like we definitely make it a very conscious decision to go over to grandparents every day and tell them to only speak Vietnamese to him. And my mom only cooks Vietnamese food and we feed him that Vietnamese food. And so like I want him to grow knowing it's possible to be both, even though I'm not as fluent in Vietnamese as I used to be. And it actually kind of makes me sad to know that he won't be able to speak as good Vietnamese as I did growing up, because my family made it a goal and a directive. Like if you're talking to us at home, it's Vietnamese. And then you can speak English everywhere else. But like, I want to make it a more conscious goal. And I think, and I hope that everyone, you know, who comes from multi-cultures do that as well, is to tell themselves, hey, it's important to kind of preserve both. It's important to know both, to understand both, and to honor both. And it's possible. It doesn't really hinder your life in any way. I think it adds more color and more culture to it.